So the All Blacks Rugby Championship squad is set to be announced next Monday, and Scott Robertson has some massive decisions that he has to make. There are injuries, there are returns, and there are a lot of predictions going around about who could be in this 36-man squad. And in this video, I'll be trying my best to predict who Scott Robertson will be selecting. Now, once again, a disclaimer, this is not who I would select, but who I think maybe Razor will give the nod to for this upcoming squad of the Rugby Championship. But jumping straight into it, in the props. In July, we did see the 6 props in the squad. Now, since the end of July, we've learnt that Tyrell Lomax does need surgery on his hand. So that does rule him out for half of the Rugby Championship. To Mighty Williams, he is only just coming back from his meniscus tear, but I do believe he will be ready for this Rugby Championship, which is why he is the first loosey prop that I believe Scott Robertson will select. The second, Ethan de Groot, and the third, Ollie Norris. No changes in this loosey prop department. If Mighty Williams was out for a little bit longer, that's when we could have seen maybe a Josh Fusitua or a Xavier Numia as the 2 other possibilities there. Ofa Tuangafasi, he must not be a mile away from coming back from his neck injury, so perhaps his name could even be in the running in the relatively near future. But for the tight heads, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. Fletcher Null, I believe they will keep in the All Black squad. Same with Basilio Tossi, and I actually think they will name Tyrell Lomax as the 3rd tight head prop in this Rugby Championship team. Now, like I said, he'll be out for 5 to 6 weeks, but in his spot as injury cover, I believe they'll name George Dyer. So not officially in the squad, Dyer, but I believe he will be the 3rd tight head that helps out the squad up until Tyrell Lomax is back to 100%. Another option, maybe someone like a Marcel Renity. Anyone who has seen that man lead a haka knows that he's got the booming voice for it, but I think that they might go with Dyer just because he was training with the squad throughout the July International, so it would make sense for him to then get that nod as a replacement and at this case. But moving on to the hookers, this is where I believe we will see no changes across the board. Cody Taylor, Samisoni Taukei'aho, and also Brodie McAllister. Now, Asafo Moore, I believe, is very close to being back from his injury. The only problem with doing this prediction as early as I am is we don't quite know who's named in those Bunnings NPC weekend matches. Asafo Moore could be playing up against Canterbury in that match on Saturday, but unfortunately we are yet to know. So that will give us a little bit more indication about where he's at and whether or not maybe he could take the spot of Brodie McAllister for this Rugby Championship. But more than likely, I would say, if he doesn't come back now, they'll save him for November and then chuck him in for their end-of-year tour, probably, rather than Brodie McAllister. Cody Taylor and Samisoni Taukei'aho, I think both thoroughly deserve their spots in this All Black squad. Taylor's been immense. Taukei'aho, they'll be building him as a bit of an impact bench alongside Ollie Norris and Basilio Tossi, so I don't see any reason to break that up. So the same hookers as they had for July. Jumping into the locks, this is where I believe Scott Robertson will select another Scott, and that is Scott Barrett, back from his calf injury in around 2 or so weeks, so he will be ready for that first match up against the Argentines, although I don't think I'd risk him for that very first test. Maybe the second, you throw him back in, see how he's doing, but the last thing that you want is for your skipper to get injured once again before the big matches a little bit later on. In the air, Patrick Tuipulotu, a man who I thought did extremely well throughout the July Internationals, definitely when being called upon after that Barrett injury. Him and Holland seem to be a bit of a dynamic duo, and hopefully we get to see that again throughout the Rugby Championship. Tupovai is the 3rd lock that I believe Scott Robertson will select, although I do actually see him playing more 6 throughout this Rugby Championship competition. He seemed to take to it like a duck to water in those matches up against the French. Of course, it's not the first time he's been on the blind side, and certainly won't be the last, as he could be a very dangerous option for the All Blacks. In the blind side, Fabian Holland, he will keep his spot. Why wouldn't he? 240 minutes that man played throughout July. They were his 3 first test matches, yet he looked like a veteran out there on the field. He was doing a majority of things right. He was one of the busiest All Blacks out there on the park. So he has definitely earned his spot to stay in this Rugby Championship squad alongside the other 3 that I have already mentioned. But this is where, with a 36-man squad, compared to the 33 with the 2 injury cover that we saw in July, this is where I believe they do need another lock. Because if Barrett isn't 100%, or if he picks up another little injury, re-tears that calf, or anything along those lines. If Vai is playing 6, I don't think they've got a lot of lock cover at the moment for the ABs. Yes, you've got someone like a Finau. If he is selected in the loose forwards, he could go to lock if needed, but I think you are better off with a specialist option. So this is where I believe there are 3 candidates for this role, or at least the 3 that I think Scott Robertson is the most likely to select. So Sam Derry, depending on his injury and depending on how close he is. Once again, he could be playing for Canterbury this weekend at the Bunnings NPC, but I just don't quite know because of how early I am filming this. Josh Lord as another possibility, and then Naitoa Akoi, because he has been training with the squad throughout July. So I do think that he, for me, is the most likely to get the nod, but I also do think that if Derry is 100%, they may chuck him straight back in. So I'm a bit undecided about that last position, but I do believe we will see an extra lock heading into that squad for the Rugby Championship. So in fact, that is the question I will ask you guys. Be sure to let me know in the comments, who do you think would be Scott Robertson's 5th lock that he does select? I know that a name like Lachlan McWannell has been mentioned, Antonio Shalthun as another guy that some would like to see get that opportunity. Or is there another man perhaps that you guys feel Scott Robertson might chuck into that role? But nonetheless, I'm going to select Sam Derry just for now. But if he is injured, I think that Naitoa Akoi may be the guy who does get the chance. Moving on to the loose forwards. This is where we've seen the fair share of injuries for the All Blacks throughout the season already. Wallace Satiti not getting off to a great start, having no minutes in July due to an injury that he did suffer around the end of Super Rugby, and that meant that Christian Leo Willie went from just being the injury replacement to then being promoted into the main squad and earning himself a number 8 jersey on 2 different occasions. And honestly, he looked like he was meant to be there in that All Blacks number 8. Definitely with Savia transitioning to number 7. We still don't know what role Wallace Satiti is going to play, because we've got to remember, if Satiti is playing 6 like he did last year, that means that perhaps Tupavai will be in that locking duo throughout the Rugby Championship. But then I don't think that Fabian Holland can be taken out too often throughout the comp. So there will be a lot of big decisions that have to be made. But in this loose forward trio, once again, this is what I feel Scott Robertson might do. I've gone Ardie Savia, and he will be the captain for when Barrett's not there, or when they are rotating between Scott Barrett and Tui Pelotu, which I think they will do throughout the Rugby Championship. I think he will stick with Samapeni Finau. That one maybe splits opinions a little bit. Samapeni Finau got all the physical attributes to be an absolute beast at international level, but hasn't really shown it in some people's eyes as of yet. He was pretty busy throughout that 3rd test up against the French, so he's probably put his best foot forward heading into the Rugby Championship. So I do think Scott Robertson will stick with him. And of the loose forwards, Wallace Satiti. He is due to be back. It did say an estimated 3 weeks on New Zealand Rugby's statement, but from the sounds of it, that could even be sooner. Although we don't want to see Wallace Satiti rush back into it and picking up a season ender. So hopefully he will be all right. And of course, he will be a danger when he puts on that All Blacks kit. Duplessis Karefi, I think that he's done enough, definitely after being promoted into the starting lineup for that 3rd test up against France. He should be there throughout the Rugby Championship. He's a handy option. He's a jackler. He's a workhorse. And yes, he's not the biggest bloke, which people keep on saying, but boy, does he have a big heart, and he will put his body on the line for the All Blacks jersey, which is exactly what a coach does love to see. Christian Leo Willie, I believe, will keep his spot in the Rugby Championship squad. This is now where we get into the controversy, just a little bit, but I believe with the injury of Luke Jacobson, he will be out for 5 weeks with a thigh injury. And I don't know if Scott Robertson, with the amount of injuries we've seen from Luke Jacobson and the lack of minutes that he's had as of late, I don't know if he'll continue with Jacobson in the squad, or whether he will look to give someone who was an injury cover player for Jacobson the nod to take his place. So this is where I actually think Scott Robertson will select Dalton Papali'i, and I know that that's possibly not popular, but he was injury cover throughout the July International, so it wouldn't completely surprise me if he does get that promotion. And if they're going with an extra forward, this is where I actually think Ethan Blackadder may get himself back into the All Black squad. Now, a lot of people have been talking about that Blackadder work rate. And the two matches that everyone has been saying Ethan Blackadder needs to be involved in are the two up against South Africa. Now, I don't know if that's what Scott Robertson feels, and I also don't know where he would fit Blackadder in. I think the benefit you've got, though, is his versatility, although there are quite a few of the guys in this All Black squad who can play that same versatile role, whether that is a Papali'i or whether that is Satiti, can really go into any jersey across the loose forward trio. But for some reason, it's that same inkling that I had when we first did our All Black squad prediction, that at least one of those two men I mentioned will be in Scott Robertson's side. And if they aren't, one of them will be there as the injury cover for Luke Jacobson. Another name that I want to throw in the mix, though, Peter Larkai. If he is 100% after his injury, once again, we've got to wait to see whether or not he's playing for Wellington. But if he is 100%, I wouldn't be surprised if Razor's willing to chuck him back in to this environment, although it's very tricky to know where they would actually play Larkai after Karefi spent most of the season for the Canes as the 7. And then the number 6 jersey, I would say with Satiti returning, is pretty secure between him and Vai, with Finau in the mix too. So I guess number 8 is where you'd have to possibly look at Peter Larkai or perhaps an impact player off the bench. So like I said, a lot of decisions to be made for Scott Robertson for his squad. But moving on to the backs. Now, this is where I believe we will see a change. First of all, in the halfbacks. Cam Roigard, he will keep his spot. Great player, brilliant throughout July, and showed absolutely everyone that he will be the starting 9 for the big games of the Rugby Championship. Cortez Ratama still finding his feet at international level, has some good moments, has a couple shaky ones, but I do still think there's a lot of potential moving forward for Cortez Ratama. Noah Hotham, he did suffer the injury in the 15 minutes of the third test that he did get to play. Unfortunately, he will be out for 7 to 8 weeks, and at this point in time, that is the longest injury that New Zealand Rugby did release a statement about. Anyone who's out for, of course, the whole season, they aren't really counted in that regard. But Hotham's 7 to 8 weeks, that makes it pretty difficult to select him in this Rugby Championship squad, because theoretically that's only 1 or maybe 2 games up against Australia at the end. So I believe we're going to see a new halfback. There are about 4 options, I believe, that have a good shot of getting in. They will either go back to the experience of Finlay Christie, or they've got the 3 younger players, Falau Fakatava, Xavier Rowe, and also Kyle Preston. Those are the names that have at least been thrown around since that injury of Noah Hotham. But I honestly do think with Scott Robertson here in the Rugby Championship, I think he's going to go Finlay Christie. It won't be the popular choice. I know that Finlay Christie also was looking at going overseas and then potentially becoming eligible for Scotland. But the thing is, at the moment, they've got Ben White, they've got George Horn, they're all right for now. This is probably Christie's best chance of playing international rugby in quite some time. So maybe Scott Robertson looks at him and goes, he's got experience, and perhaps with that, he is the best option heading into the Rugby Championship for the side. But the first 5s, no changes here. Beauden Barrett, Damian McKenzie, stock standard for the All Blacks. There's been that debate for a long time about which one is better. They both had their moments throughout the July internationals. Beauden Barrett just coming back from a hand fracture, the same injury that he had throughout Super Rugby. Damian McKenzie, he did make his way off the bench in the first minute of the first test up against the French. That was due to the head knock of Severis, and that was 79 minutes of some of the best rugby we have seen from Damian McKenzie in an All Blacks kit. So I do think that there will be once again that split between the 2 men playing 10 at different times throughout this competition, but I do think they are still the stock standard 2 that they will be selecting. Moving on to the centres. This is where I believe Scott Robertson will stick with Jordie Barrett. He really showed what he could do off the bench up against the French in test match number 3, and I do think that that was the match that turned a lot of Jordie Barrett haters into appreciators. He was one of the saving graces for the All Blacks in that third match, whether people like to admit it or not. He is a world-class 12. He's going to be in this All Blacks setup. He has actually grown a lot as a player throughout the last 1 to 2 years, and I think he's going to continue to evolve and keep on getting stronger. So that is why Scott Robertson will keep him in there, and I do think more people now are also keeping Jordie Barrett in their All Black squads. Quinn Tupaia, I do think they'll stick with him throughout this Rugby Championship comp. Now, the problem that they've got is him and Timothy Tavatavanawai both predominantly play inside centre. Yes, Quinn Tupaia has played some of the outside centre role, but not really at international level. But I do still think Scott Robertson will keep him in the side. Maybe didn't have as much of an impact at 12 as he would have liked to in the third test match, but that doesn't mean that he won't have impact further on in the Rugby Championship. So Tupaia does stay. Rieko Ioane, I'm listing him as a centre, but I do think he will be once again playing out on that left wing side where he actually had quite a bit of success throughout the July internationals. The first game he was a little bit shaky, but that was always going to be expected after not playing out on the wing for a very long time at international level. But throughout the second test match he looked a lot stronger. Third test match didn't get to play due to that tight hamstring, but I think he's still going to be out on the left, and that is also due to the injury that we've seen of Caleb Clark. Could earn Rieko a lot more minutes throughout the Rugby Championship. Billy Proctor, I believe he will be keeping a spot in this side, playing as a number 13. Him and Barrett, a combination that hasn't hit its full stride yet, but that doesn't mean it won't throughout the competition. I think they just need a little bit more time together and working out what the tactics are for this midfield as well as the backline in general. Timothy Tavatavanawai, I would be disappointed to see Tupaia or Tavatavanawai drop out of the side for this Rugby Championship, although we've got to remember last year we did see a couple players left out, including Amoni Narawa. But I do think that Timothy Tavatavanawai, I do think he's got enough skill and ability to push Jordie Barrett in that number 12 jersey, and with his power, I feel like he's just got to be somewhere in this All Black squad. And then the last man in the centres, I do believe Scott Robertson will select Anton Lienert-Brown. Now, initially he was going to be making his return in the Bunnings NPC up against Auckland tomorrow, but due to a shoulder injury. Now, it is separate from that collarbone injury that left him out for a majority of Super Rugby Pacific, but I don't think it will be severe enough to leave him out for any of the Rugby Championship. Just this NPC game, which does actually bring Lima Sopoaga back into the mix for Waikato, so a bit of an exciting one there. Veteran returns, Aaron Cruden already in the starting side. Quite a few of the throwback first fives involved in that side, but I do think that Lienert-Brown, again, even with some people not being 100% sold on him, I do think Scott Robertson is, so that's why I've selected him. And Razor's squad, we move on to the outside backs. Now, anyone who has been doing the calculations as we go will know I can only have 4 outside backs with this Scott Robertson squad. Now, I do count Rieko Ioane as an outside back. Now, I did initially put him in the centres, but I'm actually going to put him into the outside back category now. So, Rieko Ioane, the first of the outside backs, I believe the All Blacks will select. Sevu Reece is the second. He only got to play 1 minute in the first match up against the French. He came back from his concussion, and he will be rearing to go out on that right wing, as there are a couple men trying to take that spot, although we could see him on the left too, with the injury of Caleb Clark, which is actually the next man that I think Scott Robertson will select in his team. Clark expected to be out for 5 to 6 weeks, little bit similar to Tyrell Lomax. And I think that we will once again see Amoni Narawa as injury cover. Now, it's not what anyone really wants to see, but unfortunately, the track record for Amoni Narawa has not been the best when it comes to getting selected for the All Blacks throughout the July internationals. He was only considered as injury cover. Last year, he was a player who was dropped from the July squad heading into the Rugby Championship. So he's had a pretty tough rub of the green, Amoni Narawa, and I just don't know if Scott Robertson is going to promote him into the full team, or whether once again he is going to be that injury cover guy, perhaps for Anton Lienert-Brown, if that injury is slightly longer than first expected. But they'll certainly need an injury cover for Caleb Clark, while also leaving Clark to be an option for those last 2 or 3 matches. So that's where I think we'll see Amoni Narawa as that injury replacement. Once again, not what I would do, but something that might happen for this Rugby Championship squad. Moving on to the rest of the outside backs, I have got Will Jordan. I don't think there's any debate about whether that man should be in the squad. Also, a massive congratulations to the guy. He just got engaged. He's been scoring tries for fun at international level, whether you put him out on the right wing or whether you put him at fullback. So he will be there throughout the Rugby Championship. And then the last outside back that I believe Scott Robertson will be selecting is Ruben Love. Now, he can play fullback. He can also play first five. He has even played out on the wing for New Zealand. And that was actually his debut, where he got himself 2 tries off the bench. He has been released to play for Wellington in the NPC. I do hope he can stay injury-free, because if I'm not wrong, last year when he played for Wellington, he did pick up a little bit of an injury. And I do think that affected his selection later on in the year, but I do think if he is 100%, he will be in Scott Robertson's side for the upcoming comp. But that is the squad that I do believe Scott Robertson will be selecting. Now, I'm not sure of the exact split. I know that for the original July internationals, it was going to be 20 forwards, 15 backs. In this case, I've gone with 15 backs, 21 forwards. So having a few more reinforcements in that 4-pack, the extra lock and the extra loose forward is what I have a feeling Scott Robertson may select. But of course, do let me know who you guys think Scott Robertson will be picking. Also, later on in the week, I will be doing my All Black squad that I'd like to see. I've got a few changes compared to what I've selected here, but I think the biggest question marks at the moment are coming from whether or not players will be returning from their injuries. The likes of a Peter Larkai, Sam Derry, a Safwa Moore, because if all of those guys are match fit and rearing to go, there is a good chance that we could see their names being announced when the squad is being named, but that will be on Monday. We will be doing a live stream for that, as well as, of course, a video after letting you know who has made it in, who has missed out. Thank you all very much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all for the next one.